History Secrets.
Among the most enigmatic figures in biblical traditions, few awaken as much curiosity as Melchizedek. He appears briefly, without announcement, without explanation, and disappears without leaving clear traces. But that brevity does not reduce his importance. On the contrary, it amplifies the mystery. To understand this figure, we need to return to a specific episode. Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 to 20. After a battle, Abraham encounters a man, king of Salem, priest of God Most High. His name is Melchizedek. He brings bread and wine, blesses Abraham, and receives from him the tithe. The text ends almost as quickly as it began, without additional explanations, without apparent continuity. Something there remains open. That silence is not common. Biblical tradition usually details origins, lineages, genealogies. But in the case of Melchizedek, none of that appears. No father, no descendants, no prior reference. This is not only an absence of information, it is a structural void within the text. And that void raises an inevitable question. How can someone simultaneously occupy two such central roles, king and priest, in a context where these functions normally do not mix? The title itself suggests something beyond the ordinary. Melchizedek can be understood as King of Righteousness, and Salem as peace. King of Righteousness, King of Peace. These are not only descriptions, they are symbolic affirmations. They indicate a function that transcends the historical. Something there points to an identity that is not limited to an ordinary individual. But the narrative does not end in Genesis. It returns, in an unexpected way, centuries later. Psalms, chapter 110, verse 4. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. This statement completely changes the scenario. Now, Melchizedek is not only an isolated character. He becomes a reference, a model, a structure. A priestly order that does not depend on lineage, that is not linked to a specific tribe, that does not follow the Levitical pattern. This breaks with the established logic and introduces a new possibility within the tradition. Something there does not fit into the known system, and perhaps that is precisely what makes this figure so persistent. It cannot be easily classified. It cannot be reduced. It cannot be confined to a single definition. If we move forward from this point, the figure of Melchizedek ceases to be only a narrative enigma. He begins to occupy a theological space, and it is in this shift that the mystery deepens. The text of Psalms does not only mention Melchizedek, it transforms him into a reference of eternity. Psalms, chapter 110, verse 40. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. This declaration breaks with the logic of time, because priesthood, until then, was tied to succession, to the continuity of lineages. But here, something different emerges. A priesthood that does not depend on origin, nor on continuity. This raises an inevitable question. If it does not depend on lineage, where does that authority come from? And what legitimizes that function? To understand this, we must observe what the text does not say. It does not describe rituals. It does not establish rules. It does not define a structure. The order of Melchizedek is not institutional. It is presented as something that exists by itself, independent of any system. This absence of formal structure does not diminish its importance. On the contrary, it expands its reach because it shifts the focus from practice to essence, from ritual to meaning. But it is in the New Testament that this figure reaches an even more complex level. Hebrews chapter 7. There, Melchizedek is described in an unusual way, without father, without mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days, nor end of life. This description is not meant to assert a literal absence, but to construct an idea, a function not limited by time. Something there transcends the historical narrative and enters the realm of theological interpretation. Melchizedek ceases to be only a character and becomes a type of priesthood, a structure outside ordinary human logic. But this reading raises a new question. Are we dealing with a symbol constructed later, or with an older tradition reinterpreted? To explore this possibility, we need to look beyond the biblical texts and consider the traditions of the Second Temple period. In the manuscripts found at Qumran, there are references to Melchizedek. In a text known as 11Q Melchizedek, his figure takes on a new dimension. He appears not only as a priest, but as an agent of judgment, associated with the liberation of the righteous and with the defeat of the forces of evil. This representation is not merely symbolic. It attributes to Melchizedek an active role in the cosmic order, something that completely transcends his brief appearance in Genesis. And this generates an interpretative tension. The same figure can be seen as a historical king, as a theological symbol, or as an entity of elevated spiritual function. None of these readings imposes itself definitively, and perhaps that is the central point. Melchizedek remains open, resistant to conclusions. If we gather all these layers, a question begins to emerge more clearly. What exactly does Melchizedek represent within these traditions? A specific individual, or an idea that crosses different contexts? The absence of genealogy is not just a narrative detail. It produces a rupture. In the ancient world, identity was tied to origin, to lineage, to family continuity. Without that, the figure of Melchizedek is displaced, outside the pattern. And this displacement allows something unusual. He does not belong to a tribe. He does not depend on inheritance. He is not tied to a specific social structure. This makes him universal, or at least less limited. But there is an even deeper point. Melchizedek appears before the law, before the formal organization of priesthood in Israel. This suggests a prior existence, a function that exists before the structure. Something there points to a fundamental idea. Spiritual authority does not necessarily arise from institution. It may precede it. This possibility changes the reading, because it shifts the center of legitimacy, no longer based on the system, but on function, on essence. In ancient traditions, this opens space for multiple interpretations. Some see Melchizedek as a historical Canaanite king. Others interpret him as a symbolic figure. There are also readings that associate him with divine manifestations or with spiritual archetypes. None of these interpretations fully resolves the enigma, but all reveal something in common: the difficulty of framing this figure. To understand this, we must consider the role of symbols in ancient texts. A symbol does not need to be defined. It needs to function, to point, to suggest, to open possibilities. And Melchizedek does exactly that. He connects elements that are normally separate: royalty and priesthood, justice and peace, time and eternity. This convergence is not common, and perhaps that is precisely why his figure endures. It resolves tensions without fully explaining them. But this leads us to an inevitable reflection. If Melchizedek represents authority outside structure, then what does that say about the structures themselves? Are they sufficient, or are they only one of the possible forms of organization? Something there remains open, and perhaps it must remain so, because it is in that space that interpretation continues. Melchizedek does not offer definitive answers. He creates a point of tension, a point of reflection. And perhaps that is precisely what sustains his presence through time. He does not exhaust. He does not resolve. He does not close. The search to understand the past has always been part of the human journey. We explore ruins, decipher ancient inscriptions, and investigate forgotten accounts. Each discovery expands our understanding of the civilizations that came before us, but it also reveals new questions. Questions that continue to drive our curiosity, because history is not just a record of the past, it is a continuous path of discovery. Because some secrets of history are still waiting to be revealed.